right, thanks for joining us today. My name is Matt Crowley with More Visibility. I'm the Vice President of Digital Services. So I oversee three teams inside our organization, including our SEO team, our analytics team, and our design development team. And I have Sergey here joining me today to talk a little bit more about Matomo and what a deployment of Matomo looks like and some things to keep in mind. So before we jump into the weeds too far, I'll turn it over to you, Sergey, to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Sergey Kogut. I'm a Senior Digital Analytics Specialist here at More Visibility. I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss Matomo and the implementation of that.
Awesome. So I know Matomo has been a bigger area of at least conversation of recent, in particular with a lot of the trends that are happening in healthcare. Everything that came out from some guidance in December of last year related to what is PHI and had a lot of impact and considerations to GA4 deployments. And so over the last I would probably say 6 months very heavily. We've had a lot of conversations with healthcare organizations, specifically tied to how they're going to move forward in this new world. And there's many options that exist out there, from using CDPs like FreshPaint to using server-side tracking and obfuscating the IP address, if that's the path that you want to head down, but still use GA4. But also there's an option to use other analytics platforms. Matomo has been one that's come up in a lot of conversations for a variety of reasons that we're not going to dig too much into today. But when it is the right choice, or that is the choice that an organization has made, I thought it would be good for us to talk a little bit more about what that deployment looks like. Not many people out there are super familiar with Matomo or the deployment of Matomo. I know that's something that you've worked on a lot lately. So to start, at the highest level, I know Matomo is a GA4 alternative in the lens that most people think about that have been on Google Analytics, but there are also a lot of differences. So if you could just talk a little bit about like, what is Matomo? Is it just the same thing as a Google Analytics type product that everybody else is familiar with for web analytics tracking? Like, what is Matomo? What are some of the key big picture differences or similarities between like a Matomo and something that someone would know, which would be maybe Google Analytics or GA4?
Right. Well, of course, like you said, all analytics platforms are similar in the way that they have one goal: to measure the performance of your website or app, or more and more nowadays, but in general, measure the page views and the behavior of your visitors and your users. So they have the same goal, but being developed by different teams, different countries with different priorities. They come out a little bit differently. First of all, there's a big difference. Google Analytics is free for most people. There's a 360 paid tier, but Matomo isn't. So that's a very important financial aspect to consider. Matomo's annual costs are not a set figure, because what they do is actually they created an a la carte system where you get a base tracking capability basically for free. But if you want any of those advanced features, which in GA come for free, but in Matomo, they come as a paid add-on or a plugin, most of which are developed by Matomo themselves and have a monthly cost. Some of them are developed by a wide network of community developers. So you could also develop your own plugin for Matomo to add or expand the functionality that doesn't exist yet, and either use it yourself or register it and make it available to all other users of Matomo as well. But in general terms, you're talking about a cost of anywhere from free with very limited tracking, and the cost is just your own server hosting that you have to pay for, up to about $4,000 or $5,000 a year if you buy absolutely everything in a kitchen sink that Matomo can do.
And when we talk about some of those differences, or when we start getting into some of those differences, like you mentioned, like cost, what are some of the other big picture differences that you've noticed between GA4 and Matomo?
Yeah, well, Matomo is not without its quirks, just like every platform. And they seem to make sense once you get more familiar with them, but at first they can be quite shocking. Just without any order, first of all, if you're used to dashboards and you like to look at your data using Looker Studio, for Matomo, there is no native connector. So if you want to continue to use a dashboard, but switch the data source from Google Analytics to Matomo, you'd have to basically connect to a MySQL database and query that data directly. So you'd have to write some queries to extract and aggregate your raw data into the reports that are on a daily, monthly, and user session level, which is aggregated automatically for you by Google Analytics. In this case, you have to do it manually. In the Matomo's interface itself, there's several major differences as well. There's a set of pre-configured reports for you. There's an ability to create custom reports, just like in any other platform, but you can only view, for example, 3 dimensions at a time when you're looking at your traffic acquisition report, whether it's in the built-in report or a custom one you're making. So in order to see that general acquisition report that we're used to in GA, you have to actually build several custom reports and then apply at least 3 different segments by channel to those in Matomo in order to see the same data. Another little example is a host name dimension. In GA, you can incorporate it into any report and break out all your traffic by the host name if you have multiple host names on the one website. But in Matomo, you have to create a custom dimension for that first.
And what about when it comes to like a lot of the just like processing of data? I know that there are some things that have come up in our work with Matomo that we took for granted with everything that Google Analytics had done, where they do a lot of heavy lifting for us. And Matomo doesn't necessarily do that as much. I know one example that comes to mind at a high level, maybe you can talk about this, is like the default channel groupings. For example, like when we're looking at sort of the highest level sort of concept of attribution in terms of where traffic has come from before it got to the site. You know, we're very used to looking at Google Analytics and being able to see that, you know, it's very nicely packaged into social and then Facebook, or organic traffic and from Google and Bing. Does it work the same way in Matomo, or is it a little bit different?
Right. Well, yes, it has parallels, but also differences with that. It kind of treats channels in a slightly different way. For example, social traffic and referral traffic to Matomo means exactly the same thing. It's just that your referral could be coming from an abc.com website, or it could be coming from facebook.com. Google would separate those two and make one of those go into the social, organic or not channel. Another one would just remain in referral. For Matomo, that's what I was saying. You have to create those several different reports and then apply a segment that separates just the social traffic out of all of your referral traffic. So there are some awkward things to get through. On another hand, they have a different list of dimensions which doesn't necessarily match one-to-one to GA, but sort of cover the same thing. For example, when you import your universal analytics data or GA4 data, the historical set of last several years into Matomo, so you can continue to see your data year over year, some of those dimensions from GA3 or GA4 will not make it into Matomo. And if you want to have them in there, you actually have to create a custom dimension in Matomo and then route that data there, because the way Matomo calculates that, it'll be using its own versions of those. Some examples are like the demographics dimensions from GA, user demographics and interests, user type, age, gender, affinity, and market categories. Some of those, like we were talking about social media traffic source insights, which social network it was, the ad groups, the ad placements, and a lot of other stuff that it has to do with ads, given that Google is connected to its own ad network on the back very tightly. It's challenging for Matomo to have access to and interpret that data in the same way. So your ad distribution network dimensions, the ad match types, the mobile device branding, some of those dimensions, again, the data is there, but is held in a different format. So some reformatting and rerouting of the data will be necessary, especially if you're doing a historical import and then trying to look at all that together.
So there's a lot of potential gotchas. It's not just
Absolutely.
set up a page view tag and you're done.
Yeah. One common mistake is always going to be simply underestimating the amount of expertise that will be required, technical expertise for the setup, for the maintenance. Um, unlike most other in the cloud platforms such as Google Analytics, Matomo will demand a very hands-on approach from implementation to building out reports, and it can be a learning curve for some smaller teams.
Yeah. Great. And so then what about the actual deployment? What is at a high level, like the deployment process and kind of like really rough timeline look like? I know this is going to change for every organization that might actually go through deployment, but can you just talk about at a high level, sort of a general framework for what a deployment might look like?
Yeah. Well, you'll need to identify some resources internally for the stages of the deployment. You need people to build, you need people to manage, and you need people to build reports in Matomo. The typical timeline could be anywhere from a few weeks to several months, depending on the complexity of the organization, the size, the complexity of your measurement framework. Is e-commerce involved, or is it only events and page views kind of a measurement? The process involves the typical stages: planning, installation, data migration, which is optional, that I already talked about, and then finally training, which will be a very important part, as this is new for everyone, most likely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was, I think, a really great overview. But before we go, any last um, gotchas, anything that sticks out to you, if you had to leave anybody with one thing to keep in mind, if they're thinking about Matomo or in the process of migrating to Matomo, that you would want to leave anybody with?
Don't be afraid of a new system. Like I said, in the end, it's still doing the exact same thing. It's trying to measure the performance of your users and visitors on a consistent level. So even if it doesn't match one-to-one with what you are used to, if you implement it in a correct way and measure everything consistently without making changes here and there all the time, you will establish a baseline and will be able to see your directional insights, no matter what platform you're using. So Matomo, with its positives and PII handling and data ownership, is a great opportunity to switch to a different system that you own the data with and still extract the exact same insights and more, because they are all there. Some of them are just labeled differently.
Awesome. All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk us through this, Sergey, and hope this was helpful and insightful for everyone watching. And if you have any questions about how we could help with Matomo for you, or just give you more insight into what that process might look like for your organization, don't hesitate to reach out to us at either info@morevisibility.com or via one of the forms on our site, or a good old-fashioned phone call. So with that, thank you, Sergey, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be here.